Now that we've taken care of adding our threads, let's add a few fillets and chamfers to our part. The first thing we want to do is we want to chamfer the outside edge of the tip so we can have a nice seat where this ends up into the subsequent part that it's being threaded to. To add a chamfer, let's go up to our fillet dropdown and select chamfer. We're going to start by selecting the edge on the end of our part. Now you'll notice we get a nice preview on the screen. There's also a dialog box that pops up. This allows us to change the parameters on the screen by selecting and manually inputting them, or by using the up and down arrows. But there are some options in the parameters that you don't have in that dialog box. For instance, you can change it from angle distance to distance distance. You can also use equal distance or flip direction options inside here, as well as a whole host of other things. For our purposes, the only thing we're going to modify is the angle. We're going to change from a 45-degree to a 60-degree angle. Now you'll notice that it automatically disappears or it changes the preview. If we use the flip direction option, you notice that we now get our preview back. Now what happened is, by default, the way it was originally set up, adding that 60-degree chamfer was removing the center. It was going past a perfect point. So we had to flip the direction. Now, if you want to do this on the screen, you simply have to left click on the purple arrow, and that'll change the direction of the chamfer. Now we can say OK, and take a look at the tip that's been added. The next thing we want to do is add a few fillets. Now, because this part is machined, if we view it from the top side, you'll notice that we have some sharp internal corners. These are corners that could not be physically machined on a mill. So what we want to do is take care of adding a fillet to those, as well as the outside edges. To do this, we're going to start by selecting fillet, and we're going to modify the fillet radius value. Now, by default, whenever you start fillet, this is automatically highlighted, so you can just start typing. In this case, I'm going to say 15 millimeters and then start selecting. Now, the fillet tool inside SolidWorks is one of the best in the industry. It allows us to make a selection, and from the quick context that pops up, you have a whole host of options to make your selection process quite a bit easier. As you go down the line, you'll notice that it has all concave edges, all edges on the part, all connected edges, right feature, internal to feature, and so on. The one we're really concerned with is the connected to start loop, which is the internal 5 edges on the top. So we're going to left click on this, and it automatically grabs all those edges. Then I'm going to hold the middle mouse button down, rotate around, and make that same selection process on the bottom. This grabs all the internal edges that we need to be concerned with, so we can say OK. Next, we're going to add another fillet, and this time the fillet value is going to be 30 millimeters. Now the 30 millimeter value came from a 15 millimeter internal value and a 15 millimeter wall. That way we keep a nice consistent wall thickness all the way around our part. I'm going to select a single outside edge, and again use my quick context menu to grab all the outside loops and say OK. Now if we take a look at this from the top, we have a nice 15 millimeter internal radii, so we can use a 30 millimeter diameter machining bit, and we have a nice 30 millimeter outside that we can go all the way around and machine the outside of our part. Let's go back to an ISO view and take a look at what we've done so far. So to this point, we've added a lot of geometry. We started from scratch using the additive type of manufacturing. So we added all of our geometry. We started with the outside profile, added the internal ribbing or the internal wall, and we started removing some material. We removed the holes, we added a boss, we then created a pattern, and then we started to do things like cut threads and add additional features like the fillets and the chamfers. So the only thing really left for us to do is to make some final updates to the part. Now, as we rotate this part around, we have the center boss, which is completely full right now, and we need to add a little bit more detail to it. So what I want to do is I want to do a revolve cut to remove some material from the inside, and then I want to create a hex that we can put a wrench on the outside. So to start with, I'm going to use the section view option and say OK. Now with the section view, I then want to select the plane that we used to section, in this case the front plane, and start a new sketch. Now by default, you won't be able to use this geometry, even though we can select it. So you'll notice if I select it and I use my convert entities option, it doesn't allow me to bring it in. So the way that we need to bring some geometry in is use the convert entities dropdown, select intersection curve, rotate this around, grab the outside of the lower boss, the outside of the upper boss, and the outside of the major chamfer on this boss section, and select OK, then hit OK one more time. Then I'm going to use Control 8 or use the Normal to option to look back at this. I'm going to select all the entities on the left side and delete them by using the delete key on my keyboard. I then want to take all the entities on the right side and I'm going to use them for an offset. But to get started, I'm going to hit L on my keyboard to start the line tool. I'm going to draw a line from the origin straight down, double click the left mouse button to end the line creation, but still keep the insert line tool open. Then I'm going to draw another line from the origin straight up. Now you'll notice that it's automatically trying to snap to some geometry. So I'm going to hold down the control key to turn off any pervasive relations that are trying to be added. Then I'm going to hit the escape key. While this line is still selected, I'm going to select it one more time and make it vertical. The next thing I want to do is again hit the L key, start a new line, and connect these two edges. Now I can hit escape one more time, select one of these outside lines, hit the S key, and do an offset. Now we're going to be offsetting this inward 10 millimeters, and you notice that we have some options. Add dimensions, we can reverse the offset inward or outward. We have the select chain option, which automatically grabs any entities that are connected to this chain. We have bidirectional, we can offset it inward and outward. We have cap ends option, which now, new for 2016, allows us to cap ends on a non-bidirectional offset. In the past, you could only do it if you offset inward and outward. Very handy, not something we need to use in this specific instance. Then we also have options to make construction geometry of the base, which is what we initially selected, or the offset geometry. So in this case, we want to make the base geometry construction, select chain, and add dimension of 10 millimeters, say OK. So what we've done is we've 10 millimeter offset the outside chain here. We can now drag this endpoint, and again, hold down the control key to make sure you're not accidentally snapped to some geometry. And then we want to take this edge and drag it up, hold down the control key again so we don't accidentally snap to some geometry. And then we're going to hit the T key on the keyboard if you set up your trim tool quick key like I did, or you can go up to your toolbar, go down to trim entities and select trim and use the power trim, hold down the left mouse button and remove the additional entities so that we now have fully defined sketch. Lastly, we're going to use the line tool one more time by hitting L, and we want to finish off to make a closed profile. We can hit escape twice and exit our sketch. With the sketch still selected, we're going to go to revolved cut. For our axis of revolution, we're going to select the inside edge. You can rotate this around to get a preview and say OK. So now what we've done is removed a little bit more material from the inside of this part. We can turn our section view off and take a look at the results. So this now lightened up the part a little bit, removed some material that we didn't need, and now there's one last thing that I'd like to do. I want to start a new sketch on the back face of my part. I want to go back to my polygon option, make sure that it still has 6 for the number of sides, and I'm going to start at the origin and simply drag it outward. I'm going to hit escape on the keyboard to end the polygon tool, select the construction inscribed circle, control select the outer edge of my boss, and I'm going to make those equal. I then want to select one of the straight edges and make it horizontal. This gives me a fully defined sketch. Next, I want to select the inside diameter of what we just did a revolve cut on. You'll notice that when we do this, up in the top left-hand corner, we have this new set of graphics that pops up. This is something that SolidWorks added for 2016 called the breadcrumb. Now, this pops up whenever you select sketches, features, or edges, and it shows you what they belong to. So you'll notice that sketch 17, we're selecting an edge, belongs to cut revolve. This was the feature we just created to remove that material. So it's telling us this edge was created based on this feature. This feature belongs to the solid body, which is part of the entire part. In this case, it says part 2 because I haven't saved it yet, but it belongs to the entire part. Now this breadcrumb gets quite a bit more detailed as the parts get a little bit more complex, you start adding more geometry and so on. It can be a very handy way for you to track back to certain things while you're in the sketching or part environment or even the assembly environment to make quick edits. In this case, with this internal edge selected, we want to select Convert Entities. If I rotate this around, you can see that our sketch is the polygon with 6 edges on the outside and an ID that matches the revolve cut on the inside of our part. We can now exit our sketch and we can do an extruded boss base. For my direction 1 end condition, we want to change it from blind to up to surface. And we want to select the bottom edge of our boss and say OK. So now what we've done is we've added a hex boss that has the same inside dimension of the revolve cut we had, and we now have a place that we could put a socket or a wrench on. So in this case, if we were using this part and we weren't able to get our hands around the outside of the part, or we had limited space, we could also use a small socket wrench and apply some force or whatever we need to actually insert this part. If we take a look at a section view, we can get a pretty good idea of the part and how it's been created, where material could still be removed if we wish, and that we have a nice, consistent, solid part all the way through. Let's go ahead and go back to an isometric view. We're going to save our part, and that completes creating our machined design part. As you move forward creating your own machine parts, again, you have to be very careful about the geometry you create and the fact that it can actually be machined. So in this case, this part can be machined, and the 18mm tapped holes are a great way for us to hold this down as we're machining it.